Welcome, everybody. Let's open the meeting tonight. Call it to order with a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Commissioner Brashears, Commissioner Prenovo,
Here.
Commissioner Garrett Kunerowski. Here. Commissioner McLean,
Here.
Commissioner Munn,
Here.
Vice Chair Robertson,
Here.
and Chairman Savage.
Here. All right, there are no minutes from last month's meeting, which was actually a training session. So it also sounds like we have no one who's signed up to give any citizen comments as well.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to move right on to the first public hearing. It's planning file DCA-21-02. Are we following quasi judicial format for this tonight?
Legislative procedure.
Oh,
Yeah, what Kelly said. It's legislative, so we don't need to read in the quasi judicial, unless you guys like just hearing it.
well, we like to hear your voice, but I think we'll pass on the quasi judicial part and we'll just go.
Good choice.
We will go right into the staff report.
Good evening, everybody. Before you tonight is a development code amendment to authorize fueling stations in the mixed use, neighborhood mixed use, and industrial zones. As a quick recap of the multiple months of public workshops that we've had here that have been open to the public during our meetings, we currently only have fueling stations that are along the Highway 20 as they're allowed in the highway commercial zone. We went through the process in these workshops to identify what the appropriate zones to authorize, to be considered to be authorized would be. And those that were identified during those workshops were the mixed use, neighborhood commercial, and the industrial zones. And there was the desire to require in these new expanded zones for the mixed use and neighborhood mixed use, that it requires a conditional use permit to be able to do site-specific conditions and evaluation, while also identifying minimum standards within the development code to ensure that potential users understand a minimum consideration for the land use. There was also a request to identify specific site characteristics within the mixed use and neighborhood mixed use zones. Those site characteristics were for location standards for those new zones. They could be either arterial and arterial streets. So heavy traffic street next to heavy traffic street, or an arterial and collector street. So a heavy traffic street and a moderately heavy traffic street. And we identified that an appropriate development characteristic would be a minimum lot size of 12,000 square feet. This ensures those moving in and out of the site have enough area to maneuver around the different fuel pump stations and on the property to be able to exit appropriately onto the street. It was also identified that for these areas, they should be limited to intersections and corner properties to again allow for the smoothest transition in and out of those heavily trafficked areas. To add to that, there was an additional layer proposed for the potential properties that were adjacent to residential uses. And that was an expansion of a buffer area for increased landscaping, as well as a specific fence type, which was full site obscuring. So that could include chain link fencing with security, with privacy slats, wood fences or masonry walls, that kind of thing. And then in all standards, there was a requirement that the canopy lighting, any of the lighting provided is within the canopy structure itself, so that it doesn't have lights that are hanging down, which then protrude further and glow onto other people's properties. So what is before you tonight is what we have discussed in those work sessions in code language. And it was provided in Exhibit A of the staff report and was in the agenda packet. The first sections identify how the filling stations are identified within the different land use tables and the applications that they would be required for. And then there are 2 pages of basically identical code standards that are being proposed. One would be placed in the mixed use development section, and one would be placed in the neighborhood mixed use section to ensure that there's consideration of those residential standards. So with that, I can conclude my staff report and answer any questions regarding the proposed code language or what we have discussed so far.
What was the public notification process on this particular matter?
We did the legislative review process. So it was published in the newspaper. It was published on our city's website. It was published on all of our Facebook pages. It was available at the library and at the senior center and at City Hall for notification.
Mr. Chairman? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
I think we do have to open a hearing. We don't have to do the quasi judicial, but we still have to go through the hearing procedures, which simply means you need to officially open the hearing. And then we also do need to at least ask for those in favor and those against. If I'm jumping the gun, you were going to do that, I apologize.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I opened the hearing. Maybe I didn't officially open it. But the hearing, which is Development Code Amendment DCA-21-02 is officially open. And following the staff report, are there any questions for staff on this?
I think it looks great. To me, I think we've worked through it. I think it looks good. I think you've done a great job of putting this together. The only thing I think that in the language, we just need to do a little tweaking. For example, a gas filling station kind of, to me, or to some people, that might indicate that the only thing they can sell there is gasoline. I think that the wording should include gas, diesel, propane, and electric charging fueling station instead of just a gas station. And then somewhere in there, insert the word mini mart. Because somebody might be able to say down the road, well, hey, this doesn't include mini marts. This is just a gas station. So they're imagining some place with a couple of pumps or something. But, we all know what we're wanting and what we're looking for. But somebody sitting down and reading this that hasn't been to all these meetings, they might look at that and say, hey, wait a minute. All you approved was a gas station for selling gasoline. So I think that just to include in the wording, to include gas, diesel, propane, electric charging, fueling station, instead of using the word gas station. And then somewhere in there, insert the word mini mart included or whatever.
So the mini marts are already approved in these zones.
Correct. So the language gas parentheses filling and then stations is a existing language that is utilized universally within the existing code for highway commercial zones. And so if you go through the highway commercial zones and all of the gas stations that currently exist, you have some that already have diesel, you have some that already have electric charging stations, maybe not here, I don't think so. But they also already have mini marts associated with them. The mini mart is categorized as a separate use, which is a permitted by right use as a general commercial activity. And so you can actually pull that as a separate use and you can have multiple commercial activities on the same parcel. The gas parentheses filling station provides a generalization to where we don't need to list out each of the different types of fueling that is authorized, because it's generally the action of the filling station. The general language of gas is to have the connotation of a vehicle gas filling station itself. And so it's a universal language that is applied. If somebody were to come into the city and say, hey, I want to do a hydrogen filling station, we would look at this and go, that falls under this category. At the very worst, if a planner was looking at it, they would look at it and go, well, it says gas, but it does say filling. And so we would do what's called a similar use interpretation, and you'd get to the same space. And so what we're trying to do is maintain the same code language throughout the code so that it's not sparsed out and used differently in different parts of the code. So I think the general language of gas parentheses filling station gets you where you want to go. And the mini mart is a separate use outside of it that's not impacted by anything that's happening here, but could universally be combined with the use itself.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
Yeah, it sounds like we're not changing what's already there, basically. Just seems acceptable.
So anyway, that's all that I had. Yeah.
There is one part of the section under B, based off of our last meeting. At the end of it, there was a question about whether or not a 10-foot landscape buffer was required adjacent to residential zones, or could it be reduced to 5 feet? So in the code language, I do say 10 feet or 5 feet. We would like to have clarification by the commission of which standard you'd like to have applied.
You're looking at D,
At B1,
D1.
under landscape standards.
So Kelly, we discussed this quite a bit, multiple times. Would you mind for the group kind of giving us paraphrase of kind of the pros and cons of each?
So the intention behind the conversation and the development code standards was to identify a minimum standard and address any potential impacts and create a buffer between residential uses and the filling station use. The way to do that, because the identified potential impacts are going to be light and noise, the way to do that is to provide a barrier such as the full screen fencing, and to buffer the area between the two uses with additional landscaping to create a noise buffer barrier. And so you can do that with the application of high screen landscaping and requiring a continuous screen of hedges. Or you can require that with the high screen landscaping while also increasing the width of that landscaping to further separate the use, while also providing more material to dampen any noise associated with it. And so right now, our code standard for any application would be a minimum of 5 feet landscaping between properties. If we're trying to enhance the buffering between the uses, the recommendation would have been 10 feet or somewhere in between that 5 to 10 foot range.
Do you see any cons with a 10-foot buffer?
Property maintenance. There's, as we discussed in the last meeting, there's a potential of individuals that are looking to utilize a densely landscaped area to be able to shelter in for a time period. That becomes a property owner onus to not allow that to happen. But there's a larger likelihood of property maintenance having a less due to the more landscaping. Beyond that, somebody else could probably think of a con that I'm not thinking about.
Right. In my mind, I'm trying to decide if, you're gaining that much more dampening of noise and privacy with the additional 5 feet, or if it's really just increasing the amount of landscaping that has to be maintained by the property owner. I feel like the main impact of a fueling station on the properties next door is primarily the light, if there is a mini mart, and then there will be noise, but it'll just be cars going in and out. And I don't know that the landscape buffer is going to change a whole lot of that. I was initially for the 10-foot buffer. And now I'm not quite sure that it's necessary, but I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on it. At this point, I'm kind of either way. But I guess I'd like everyone's input.
Seems like it would be more of an impact on the minimum lot size. If it was a large lot size, it seems like it would have less impact.
To go 5 feet.
Yeah. 5 feet would be,
Give them more room to work with the property design,
Yes.
with the layout.
yeah,
Okay.
the minimum size.
I agree with Jeremy. I think 5 foot's reasonable.
Feel free to disagree, please. I'm, like I said, I'm on the fence on this. I like the idea and I picture this nicely tiered landscaping in a 10-foot space, but realistically, I don't know that that's going to happen. And I guess I'd like to hear everyone's thoughts on it. Don?
Well, I agree with you. I'm leaning toward the 5 foot because like we spoke about during the work session, 10 foot could, I should say, create more opportunity for illegal activities,
More hiding space.
more hiding space. So I lean toward the 5 foot.
I think with a 5 foot, it would have less impact on parking area, turnaround area, possibly.
Regardless of 5 or 10 foot, we still have to have the high screen lights, correct?
Right.
So, I mean, there's still maintenance for that, they still have to maintain those hedges, no matter what kind they are. We're gonna have that, I don't see, but having more push.
5 foot's reasonable to me.
Same with me.
Okay. Sounds like everyone feels like 5 foot is enough of a buffer and makes the most sense for what we're trying to do. Does that sound good to you, Kelly?
Whatever the pleasure is of the planning commission sounds great to me. One thing that I would note is if we are not increasing the landscape standards to 10 feet, we no longer need to specifically call that out unless you want to call out specifically that a high screen landscape standard is required rather than just calling it out as part of the conditional use permit application. So our code is already set up to state the planning director or the planning commission can establish the minimum landscape standard to be applied, whether it's the high screen standard or the general standard or the options that are available. So you can do that already through your conditional use permit application. Same with the fencing standards. You can already do that with your application process. So we can either leave it in to specifically call out, you still need to do the 5 foot, and we're specifically putting it in the code that it shall be the high screen no matter what, so that it's never missed in the conditional use permit application. Or we can just identify that those are standards that are applied within a conditional use permit application, and you can likely just get rid of all of subsection B.
I think the less language, the better if it's going to be repetitive. And we don't have to repeat the 5 foot because that's already the standard. And then as far as the high screen, you're saying that that's part of the conditional use anyway.
Those are the general standards that we usually put as conditions as part of it.
And even if you didn't, we could.
Absolutely.
Does anyone have a problem with omitting section B? It was B, right? B,
D,
D,
D1.
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 Yeah,
Yeah, D1.
okay.
So be it.
So then we're removing those sections that specifically call out development standards when adjacent to residential. That's applied during the conditional use permit, but the general standards that are identified remain in effect.
Correct.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions for staff or comments here? Do you guys feel like we've done a decent enough job providing a buffer and the conditional use is enough of a process to make it reasonable to have a fueling station potentially next to residential use? I'm getting head nods, like we feel like we've done our due diligence and that we're comfortable moving forward with recommending this to city council. that fuel stations are now allowed in these particular instances.
All right, with that being said, I'd like to make a motion.
I think we still need to offer it up as public comment. Is that right?
Do we need to ask for public comment? Okay. All right. Is there anyone, I guess, online tonight who would like to speak in favor or in opposition of this recommendation? I'm giving extra time because it's Zoom or whatever we're on. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Then we'll close the public comment portion, and all further discussion will be between the planning commissioners and staff.
Okay.
All right, so it sounds like we're all comfortable, and I just want to reiterate, this is a recommendation to change our development code. This is a change to our development code. It's a recommendation to city council to do so. And it feels like from the comments and feedback I'm getting, everyone's comfortable with this and we're ready to move forward. So I'd entertain a motion if someone would like to make one.
All right. I move that the planning commission recommend approval of the development code amendment DCA-21-02 to the city council based on the written findings in the staff report, and direct staff to draft an order of recommendation incorporating the findings and conditions of approval.
I'll second.
All right, we have a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. All right, that motion carries unanimously. All right, that's the end of our public hearings. Next is the commission business and comments.
I believe that we do not have any applications for December, but we will have our annual severe rent burden community public meeting in our December planning commission meeting. So we will be prepared for that. I have some fantastic news that we got a grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development to be able to fund our housing production strategy. And so we are planning to kick that off probably in January or early February. The Planning Commission will be the advisory board, so we will utilize this board as the feedback loop for us, as well as I believe there's 3 different community outreach opportunities planned outside of any of the meetings associated with the advisory committee. And we would also be having stakeholder groups participate in that as well. So we are planning on doing significant outreach associated with that housing production strategy. And then
Oh,
go ahead.
I was going to say, could you broaden the definition of housing production strategy?
No. It is a requirement associated with House Bill 2003, I think, where basically, thanks, Don. Basically, the state has identified, you have a housing needs analysis, which we have already worked on, which we have identified how much housing is needed in our community over a certain period of time. That will be coming before the Planning Commission probably in February or March next year to go through the codifying process. So now that you know how much housing you need, now the state is adding on to a layer saying you as a city need to evaluate how you are going to incentivize production of that housing. Whether it's through us modifying our development code to make things easier, cutting red tape, whether it's providing financial incentives, whether it's changing our zoning to increase the type and opportunity for different housing. There's a toolbox that's available out there that we then choose through that toolbox or create our own new tool to say we are going to implement these strategies to entice and encourage development in our community.
Is the state willing to give us $30 million for a wetlands mitigation bank?
No.
Okay.
Kelly, how big is the grant?
I just looked at the proposed budget today and it's $80,000 for the consultant to provide us these services.
$80,000.
Mhm.
That'll go quick.
So the consultant's going to analyze our system,
Mhm.
find areas that we may,
Correct.
I guess, make it easier to build houses in Lebanon.
Yes.
Okay.
So is there a task force being put together, or will we be the task force?
You all will be the advisory committee. We will have a staff committee that is going to be providing a bunch of internal work. We will also have stakeholder groups that are going to be made up of development groups, that'll be made up of community service providers, that'll be made up of housing advocates, that'll be made up for houseless advocates, all of that kind of stuff. So there will be multiple layers of communication for people to provide us input on this. But it'll run through the planning commission for final advisory to the city council.
So was Lebanon targeted to this program, or is this statewide,
It
every
is
city?
statewide, every city that is over a population of 10,000. Yeah. Because you probably would be asking the question, why are we doing this when we're approving housing left and right?
Especially when you have Corvallis just down the road that does not.
Yeah,
Okay, I was curious.
Yeah,
they have to do it too.
because it feels like we're doing everything we can, but maybe,
Yeah.
maybe the audit will find, or not the audit, it is an
It is
audit.
basically a code
Maybe they'll
audit.
find a few areas where we can cut some red tape or something like that.
Yes. And it is a housing production strategy. There are no specified strategies, with a caveat that I believe that this is correct, but it might be incorrect. There are no specified strategies in the HB 2003 that we shall implement, but we need to go through the process to evaluate what we are doing to see if there are things that we could be implementing and the appetite and the ability to implement those types of things. So it'll be a process that we'll go through.
And this is required how many how many years?
8.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
And if you don't get grants, that could be a severe burden for smaller cities, like a city with 12,000 to have to come up with something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. What else?
We also got an unofficial notification that we will likely be funded for our economic opportunity analysis, which is another big planning process that we'll be going through, which is going to, instead of looking at the housing side of our city, it'll be looking at the commercial and industrial side of our city. And so we got the wink, nudge, nod that we will likely be getting that funded. And if so, that will fund for a consultant to help us through that process as well. What that process looks like, I'm not quite sure yet. We haven't labeled that out yet, but we would be hiring our own consultant rather than being provided one. And then work through that process. And so that will likely not kick off until maybe March or April of next year. So,
Is that part of the stimulus package that Congress just passed?
no, the grant funding that we're applying through is a biennium grant cycle provided through the Department of Land Conservation and Development to provide technical assistance analysis to do these studies that the state requires us to do and to update our codes and our comprehensive plans and all that kind of stuff. There was an increase in funding through that technical assistance grant process to where they're able to fund more projects this year, but this is a recurring grant cycle of every 2 years.
State grant.
State grant, yeah. So those are the big things that we're working on. Anything else from you guys?
What's the date of our December meeting?
December 15th, I believe. Yeah, December 15th.
Okay.
So.
All right. Does anyone else have anything? Seeing nothing.
Okay.
This meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.